There we go. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Impact in Coffee Day. We have a special Impact in Coffee this morning where we're going to try something very different. So I'm Robert Nelson. I'm your co-host. I'm from Pivotal, New Mexico. I'm joined today by my wonderful co-host, Michael Green. Hi, Michael. How are you today?
Hey, everyone. I'm well. Thank you, Robert. Thank you for joining us for this experimental and exciting special event that we're having. I'm glad you guys are all here.
Michael, can you talk a little bit about what Impact in Coffee is?
Sure. Impact in Coffee is an open, welcoming conversation to exchange stories and ideas, foster innovation, strengthen the nonprofit sector, and build community. We like to do this all by bringing everybody together over a nice cup of coffee. So that way we can kind of share experiences and connect with each other.
Thanks, Michael.
So, yeah, Robert, today is also Gratitude Tuesday. So would you like to share something with us that you're grateful for, Robert?
You know, I'm grateful for every one of our speakers today who decided to come on and talk about why it's important to vote. So, 2 weeks from now is the election. It's one of the most, I feel, as someone, as an immigrant, this is my first presidential election. So I'm really grateful for the right to vote and encourage people to vote as much as possible because that's one of the ways in which one of the most sacred things in our democracy, which I don't think is taken very seriously sometimes, but I am grateful for the right to vote, and I'm grateful for all the folks who showed up today. So I just want to remind folks, if you are not speaking, just to mute your video just yet. We will make sure that we call on you when it is your time to speak. Michael, is there anything that you're grateful for on Gratitude Tuesday?
I'm just grateful for the fall weather. It's nice to go out into the mountains or the bosque and see the changing colors and feel the temperature drop. And so it's always been my favorite season. So I'm excited for that. And if any of you have anything that you're grateful for, we would love you to share that information in the chat. So feel free to let us know what you're grateful for in the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate that. We're gonna invite our first guest to speak on why it's important to vote. This really, really amazing leader in our community with Strong Families New Mexico of Four Together, Adriann Barboa. Adriann, could you unmute and show your video and talk a little bit about why it's important for us to vote and engage our community?
Yes. Thank you so much to Impact and Robert and everyone who organized this great event. As you know, it's so important to vote. And again, my name is Adriann Barboa, and I work for Strong Families New Mexico, a program of Forward Together Action. And we do what we call year-round civic engagement. And I can tell you through when we defeated that anti-abortion ballot initiative that came to Albuquerque, that we did so because we knocked on doors that had never been knocked on. We talk to voters that nobody cares to talk to, that campaigns don't spend money or waste time on talking to. And those people, those are the folks that came out in large numbers. I can remember knocking on doors for the paid sick day campaign and a woman telling me that she had lived in her house for 25 years and no one had ever come to her door. There is a whole bunch of us that are being ignored. We're not part of that formula that candidates use to win. We're not part of that formula that they use where they only talk to those people who have been voting for so long. And I got to tell you, I've seen the numbers. It is older, white, affluent New Mexicans that are voting. It is not us in the numbers that we need to be there. And it's because of that we need to be talking to those unlikely voters, to those folks who don't believe. And why don't they believe? Because in 1776, when this system of how we elect our leaders was made for only white men age 21 and older who own land. Those were the only people. When this system was made in 1776, those were the only people that could vote. So even white Americans were counted out of that system, right? You had to be 21 and you had to own land to be a vote. It wasn't until 1920, so 1776, this stuff started. It wasn't until 1920 that women, really white women, got the right to vote. It wasn't until 1924 that the people that are indigenous to this continent got Native American citizenship and voting rights. And it was in 1964 when the Federal Civil Rights Act is passed to ensure that all men and women aged 21 and older, regardless of race, religion, or education, have the right to vote. Now, this started in 1776. We have hundreds of years of our folks fighting, struggling to make sure that we can have a voice, dying, putting their life on the line for us. And it wasn't until 1984 when the Federal Voting Accessibility for Elderly and Handicap Act requires polling places to be accessible to people with disabilities. Now that is just outrageous, right? That our folks that had disabilities didn't always have access to the polls, to the places where everyday decisions impact their lives. Now, I share all of this because many of you probably know that this system was never made for most of us. It was not made for us. And many of us, I've been there. I've been to the place where I want to say, you know, forget this. It wasn't meant for me. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to build our own places. We're going to have our own systems. But I can tell you right now that every single day, those folks make decisions about how we access healthcare, about what our water looks like, about whether we're in war, about whether our kids can access equitable education, whether women can finally get equitable pay for equitable work. I mean, everything we do from when we leave our house to where we sleep at night is impacted by this process, this system that was never made for most of us. So I encourage you as a person that we, instead of worrying about what wasn't made for us, let's remember that nothing about us without us is for us. And so we have to be in that space. We have to be in all the spaces. And that doesn't mean that one space is better than the other. We have to be in elected officials. We have to be in the hospitals. We have to be at the polling, at the voting polls. We have to be in every corner. And we are there. We have to make our voices heard and not be afraid, because now's the time, just like it has been. And we continue to show up, and I'm excited. I'm a grandma for the first time. My daughter just had a baby on Sunday, and I'm full of love and joy and hope for our future. So like our Indigenous ancestors have taught us, right, is that we have to look back. We can never forget to look back and learn from our history, but we also have to think forward. And our Indigenous ancestors tell us 7 generations, 7 generations. What is this? What are we leaving here for 7 generations ahead? And I meant
All right. Thank you so much, Adriann, for your enthusiasm and your passion about voting.
I just want to acknowledge that we are on Tiwa land. I meant to start with that, but thank you. And I'm ready to.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here today. And again, thank you for the nice history you gave of voting in the United States. So now I'm going to invite Lilly, Irvin, Vitela to come forward. She is from New Mexico first, and she is going to be our second presenter. So Lilly, if you can go ahead and turn on your camera, and we'd love to hear from you.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to have been invited and to be here with each of you and to learn with and from each of you. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about why voting is personally important to me, but I'm also going to tell you about why we care about it so much as an organization. So I grew up in a very traditional New Mexico family that had very traditional ideas about who had a say in decisions. And I think, so I've always had an acute understanding of power dynamics and the need to take advantage of every opportunity you can to not only assert your own power and your own agency in your life, but the ability to do that in relationship with others, right? And so, so I'm also somebody who has always been very interested in politics, whether it was listening to my grandmothers have conversations with the other elders in my grandmother's village, or whether it was watching the news with my grandpa on the other side of the family. He fought in World War II. He was very concerned about foreign policy. He was very concerned about our community. And so they had very different political perspectives. One had grown up in the Deep South. One family has been here forever, but had been educated in New England. And so you have these very, very different political views. One of them, was a World War II veteran, and one of them was blacklisted for her communist beliefs, right? So always have been infused with, like, we can live in community and be in family and maintain respectful relationship and have radically different perspectives about the world and be good people. And so, so voting is always important to me. Back when we used to, there's been different ways that we've registered people to vote. In the past, you had to be like, there was a whole process. So as soon as I was able to vote, I also became a deputy voter registrar, wanting very much to not just have certain people. And so, I was lucky. I had a chance to get a scholarship and go to UNM. And I was concerned about organizing and getting out the vote with other students, but I also took that back to my dad's neighborhood, which is primarily poor and working class people. And I made sure to get him registered, to get his neighbors registered. So, because I knew that there were decisions being made that were not informed by the people who would be most impacted by those decisions. And so that's one of the reasons why voting matters so much to me, because I don't think it's the only thing we should be doing. I think electoral politics matter. Early on in my concern about politics, I was very, very involved in electoral politics. And in my early 20s, I saw that you could work your butt off, get people elected, and have them forget about you and the needs and interests that they said they would represent. And that there were other ways that we needed to organize and engage. And so for me, I still work on and support very targeted ways, campaigns. And I also do work more broadly in terms of broad-based coalition and movement building around issues that are of concern to myself and the communities that I come from. So I actually wanted to share what I thought was a really interesting perspective. So guilty pleasure, I love watching Red Table Talk. And so if you all haven't checked that out, with the 3 generations of women, Jada Pinkett Smith, Grammy, and Willow, kind of having conversations about all range of things, do. But there's a really fun and interesting Red Table Talk that they had with Ice Cube and Van Jones and Brandon Marshall. And Ice Cube had put together this, he worked with a number of folks to really look at what was going on with Black Lives Matter and to look what was going on to have different outcomes for Black and people of color in general. And one of the things that they said was, voting and thinking that's going to change everything is like doing a couple of sit-ups and thinking you're going to be fit. And so I just want to remind us, like, yes, absolutely, voting is important. I think it's one way that we can either take a protective or defensive stance or advance an agenda that we think is most consistent with our own and with the needs of our community. And we can't stop there, because it's about how we engage all day, every day, as much as is humanly possible within our own capacity to make a change about the things that matter most to us. And so, voting is a part of the relationship, being in constant relationship with policymakers and decision makers, and bringing other folks into that relationship is super critical to have the kind of community.
I'm really sorry. Thank you so much. I just want to move us on forward. We have to do that. I appreciate your story. Please share where you found that in the chat. I know I'm going to be a little bit of a stickler today because we have a lot of folks that are amazing, and we want to make sure that they get a chance to speak. I also just want to thank Adriann Barboa for bringing up that we are on occupied Tiwa territory, and we should have started that this spring. It's a good reminder that for those of us, we are living on stolen land, and that we are still occupying that stolen land today. So thank you, Adriann, for that reminder, and to everyone too, that we just to know that. So our next speaker is a really good friend of mine. He's from the New Mexico Dream Team. It's Felipe. Felipe, if you could turn on your video and unmute yourself and talk a little bit about why it's important to speak, why it's important for folks to vote, especially from your community.
Hey everyone, I'm not able to turn on my video.
Okay. Oh no.
looks like the host is stopped me.
Let's do that. Hold on a second.
All right.
There we go. Thank you, sir. And then Felipe froze. Man. Well, I think as there are definitely always technical issues whenever we're live, I'm going to invite CNM to join us today, because I know they wanted to talk about the bond issue. I'm not sure if they are here this morning yet, but that is okay. So we are a technical issue. So why don't we do this? Why don't we go to Karen Wentworth of the League of Women Voters. Karen, if you could unmute yourself and turn on your video and talk about why it's important to vote, that would be really helpful.
Actually, can you hear me okay now? Okay. I'm grateful for Adriann for giving the whole history of voting in the United States, because that's important. That's something we've been celebrating this year. The League of Women Voters has been in Albuquerque since 1948. And almost since that time, we have been doing Voters Guide. When you go to the polls at the early voting centers, you'll be able to pick up a copy of that guide and see what is in it about the candidates, about the issues, about the constitutional amendments. And this is something we do completely with volunteers. Every year, year after year, every election. And if that kind of consistency appeals to you, we would invite you to join the League. One of the things I'm really grateful for in New Mexico is that we are still able to talk with each other. And we're even able to hear each other. Sometimes you have to talk with each other 40 or 50 times, but you can get things done. And I want to encourage everyone to just, whatever your issue is, whoever has to hear you, just keep going back. They can't always do it. Public officials can't always do anything quickly. And sometimes you have to be persistent over years, but you can make changes. And that's something that the League has learned the hard way over years and years of trying to convince people to do things. If you're interested in tackling serious issues, we have two big ones that we're working on now. One is redistricting in New Mexico. We want the redistricting after the census is done to be fair for everyone. And the second big one that we're working on is the storage of nuclear waste in southwestern New Mexico or southeastern New Mexico. Anybody who's interested in that issue, in either of those issues, and would like to study them, to work on them, I would invite you to just contact me and we'll talk about it. And in the meantime, please just go vote.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that. I think that's the most important thing, just get out there and vote. So I appreciate everything you shared with us. Cool. So I saw that Felipe came back. Felipe, would you like to see if you work right now?
Yeah, it seems that my internet is back on. Sorry, everyone. Hey, everyone. Felipe. I came to the US 8 years ago and was undocumented for 8 years until this year that I was able to fix my status. But during that time, aside from facing a lot of obstacles that undocumented people face living in the US, I remember very clearly learning from my uncle that had been here for a really long time. Him telling me that I should never speak up and I should never get in trouble because before I knew it, I will be detained and in deportation proceedings. And that's the reality that I lived in for a few years. Very scared of speaking up and demanding what our community needs. Eventually, I got into organizing, and I decided to not be scared anymore. But I still could not vote, and I still could not do a lot of the things that my citizen peers were able to do. And it was then that I understood that a lot of our people are not voting, not always because of fear, but also, or just not enthusiasm, but also because of very deep systemic issues that are not allowing people to register to vote or to actually vote. And Adriann mentioned a lot of those issues that have prevented our people from voting for many years. I think even today, for someone that doesn't speak English, it's really hard to figure out how to request an absentee ballot or register to vote. I think that we are facing a new set of issues with COVID-19 that are going to make all of this worse for our community. And so facing these obstacles at NMDT, we have identified that it's really important for us to build electoral power as a strategy to win, and for communities to build electoral power. And given we're immigrant communities that makes us face the really big obstacle that a lot of us cannot vote. However, we're really good organizers. And so our team is made of directly impacted youth that a lot of them, like me, are not able to vote, but they're getting all their friends, family, community members out to the polls, informing them how they can vote, because they also want to make a change, and they want to change the reality that they live in and the reality that their community lives in. We have launched the Vota con Ganas campaign because we want to make sure that we're not getting out people to vote, but que lo hagan con ganas, that they're sharing our vision of how their vote is a way to fight back against the systemic issues that are putting our community under, and that they can see their vote as part of our vision to create a state that invests in education and not deportation, and a state where all of us can thrive regardless of where you come from or who you come from. And so far, our team has been able to make over almost 50,000 calls just this month, educating voters on how to vote, how to take advantage of absentee voting and early voting. And so how everyone can help is spreading the word, educate other people in how they can vote and register to vote. Use your privilege if you have the chance of being able to figure out how to absentee vote. Use that. If you have a flexible schedule that allows you to early vote, use that, because a lot of our community is not able to go and early vote because they have 2 jobs and maybe election day is the only time that they can do it. And also you can support our work by going to nmdreamteam.org, and I'll put the link in the chat.
Thanks, Felipe. I appreciate that. That's amazing. 50,000 calls. I really appreciate that. I am pleased to introduce Tracy Hartzler over at CNM. Thank you so much for joining us, Tracy. Tell us why it's so important to vote this election cycle. And you're on mute.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation to be here and to participate. And there's no question it's incredibly important to vote, because it's one of the primary and the most immediate ways that you can participate in making sure your voice is heard, but actually allocating where really important resources are, that resources can meet your priorities. There's no question that on the ballot, I was really pleased to get my ballot, and I voted last Friday and submitted my ballot in the secure box on Friday afternoon. But what I was able to do is say how I wanted judges to be elected, to amend the New Mexico Constitution, so I could choose how I want to be governed and how we want to participate in elections. I was able to choose to support, or whether to support, spending on local infrastructure and utilities, and certainly libraries and senior citizens and education. And a very important issue, certainly here in New Mexico, are our statewide bond issues. So Bond C supports our colleges and universities, and Bond B supports our libraries. those are incredible public resources that are going to help at least CNM help us provide better student services and use our technology in our facilities better. So, it's an immediate way to show what's important to you, how priorities can be funded, and it's a clear sign to those public officials, to those elected officials, that you matter, and that you can then go to them in November and January when they're sworn in, and you have a different role in the political process. So, and it's certainly a meaningful one. I've always found voting incredibly important, and I've been doing it for a while. So.
Thanks, Tracy. We really appreciate that. Because we had some technical difficulties, we had to shift a little bit. We can actually move towards our next portion, which is a video. And Tracy, could you say which bond it is again? Which one?
Sure. Bond C is $156 million for colleges and universities. That bond will create about 1,500 jobs and a variety of trades, including architecture and construction, but it also won't be a tax rate increase. So we're really proud that it doesn't change our tax rate increase, but it also creates jobs. And obviously for CNM, it supports students. For UNM and others, it provides for a school of nursing and a center for population health, just critical projects at this time. So I really appreciate your time and everyone's participation today.
Awesome. Thank you for that education on the bond issues. I really appreciate it. We're going to cut to a video by Poet Laureate Mary Oishi. She couldn't join us today, but she wanted to share this really special poem with all of us on a poem entitled Democracy's Angels. So we're going to play this one really quickly, and hopefully everyone can hear it.
Abigail Adams said, "Remember the ladies," but they only remembered white landowning men. For Abigail Adams, I vote. Sojourner Truth asked, "Am I not a woman?" To the Women's Convention in Akron, Ohio, the year was 1881. For Sojourner Truth, I vote. Victoria Woodhull ran for president 48 years before most women were able to mark her name. For Victoria Woodhull, I vote. Susan B. Anthony, arrested for voting, refused to pay the fine. Champion of abolition, then women's suffrage, selfless, the first woman on a coin. For Susan B. Anthony, I vote. Ida B. Wells, journalist, used the power of her words, refused to go to the back to appease the Southern contingent in the women's suffrage march. Instead, she held her head high, brought her sisters to the front of the fight. For Ida B. Wells, I vote. Alice Paul sent a parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? Picketer, civil disobedient, political prisoner on a hunger strike, force-fed raw eggs through a feeding tube. Too radical for some, but her treatment in prison woke up the nation. The 19th Amendment was finally passed. For Alice Paul, I vote. Fannie Lou Hamer, organizer of Mississippi's Freedom Summer, speech so compelling LBJ called a press conference to preempt it. Threatened and shot at while trying to vote. Arrested while trying to register more. Beaten so badly in prison, it sent Fannie Lou to an early grave. This is what happens in what we call America, she said, with the sadness of a loving wife betrayed. For Fannie Lou Hamer, I vote. Shirley Chisholm, first black woman to run for president. If they don't give you a seat at the table, she said, bring a folding chair. For Shirley Chisholm, I vote. Multitudes unknown to history who marched and bled, and some of them died. Though their names are all gone, their courage survives them. What they fought for lives on. For democracy's beautiful angels, I vote. I vote.
That was amazing.
That was great. It's amazing that she was able to make that for, I mean, this time of what's going on in the world and everything. So really appreciate that she was able to share that video with us. All right. So next up we have Tweety Paisano-Suazo from the Native American Democratic Caucus of New Mexico. So Tweety, if you could, unmute yourself and turn on your camera. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm from the pueblos of Acoma and Laguna. In 1948, Miguel Trujillo, who was from Isleta Pueblo, who's Tiwa speaking, came back from World War II and wanted to vote. That was 72 years ago. 72 years ago, only 72 years ago, the Native American population in New Mexico was given the right to vote. You know, this pandemic has highlighted the many problems that already existed in our tribal communities. The lack of water, the lack of quality health care, economics. Many of our people are self-employed. They're potters, they're jewelers. This closing and has really affected them and their economic way of life. Education, there's lack of broadband. It's affected the schools. You know, in the tribal communities in Acoma, they placed up canopies at the end of the school year. And the reason they did that was to have kids have the ability to go over and sit under the canopies to be able to do their homework or any of the work they needed, because they didn't have that at their own schools. It's extremely important for healthcare. There's telehealth, there could be counseling. There's a whole lot of reasons and a whole lot of that broadband is extremely important, especially to the rural communities. As a Native American woman, protecting sacred sites is also extremely important. We are Native women, protecting our Mother Earth, her resources, water, air. That's extremely important to our Native people. You know, the Trump administration has proposed millions of dollars in budget cuts to Native American education, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Our current president has even questioned tribal sovereignty, the concept of tribal sovereignty, something that is so extremely important to the Native American people. Even to the point that this past year in November, the president, November in 2019 is usually considered Native American Heritage Month. The White House chose to celebrate November as, quote, National American History and Founders Month, totally dismissing the Native American communities in this United States. I know that it's extremely important for our tribal communities to get out and vote. They need to know the ramifications on how that affects them in their everyday life. I thank you so much, Tawa'e. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present our views and to be a part of this conversation. Tawa. Every native vote counts. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tweety. We really appreciate that. let folks know in the emojis to cheer her on. Our next speaker today is Rhiannon Samuel of Viante, New Mexico. Rhiannon, if you could unmute yourself and turn on your video.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert, Michael, and the whole Impacting Coffee team for allowing me to speak. You have curated a really fantastic slate of people to talk about voting. And my hope is that I can take it in to build off of what they said and take it into another direction as well. As Felipe was talking, and he had mentioned about the privilege that some of us have in knowing how to do things, that's something that I find in my work at Viante. When somebody simply says, go out and vote, for somebody who has never done it before, that's intimidating, especially if they're advanced in age or they may not be that typical 18-year-old first-time voter. And so I think it's on us to share what we know with everyone else and to not have a stigma around voting. I've gotten questions like, do I need to dress up to go and vote? Because they were unsure if they needed to be in business casual. No, you can show up in sweats, you can show up in your pajamas, you can do whatever you want, vote. I've gotten questions around, well, what if people know how I voted? No, they won't know. That it's private. The only thing that's public is if you voted. So vote. If it's in disagreement with your family, with your friends, anything, you can still vote, and you don't have to have any of the shame associated by being a first-time voter. There's no silly question. I also want to touch on something that President Hartzler talked about, and that was all the other issues on the ballot. Right now, top of mind is the presidential election. And don't get me wrong, that is very, very important. And you should come to a conclusion on who you want to support there. But there are so many other things on your ballot that require your vote, your voice, your attention. They range from those 2 constitutional amendments that if we ever change the Constitution in New Mexico, it has to be via our vote. There's also bond issues that fund infrastructure. But also I would encourage you to look at your state rep and senator. These are the people who go up to Santa Fe every year and allocate $7 billion of our taxpayer dollars to fund teachers, roads, criminal justice programs, all these things that really keep our society going, and they yield a lot of power. So take the time to look at your ballot before. You can look at our website on nadcnm.chair. We have all the resources there so you can be an educated voter and not just vote, but be an educated voter and know that there is no silly question. Everyone here on this call, I'm sure, is willing to help you and share what you know with someone else.
Thank you so much, Rhiannon, for that. I think it's important that you reiterated the fact that there are many other issues on the ballot besides just the president. So I appreciate you re-emphasizing that. So that is important for all of us. All right, so next up we have Sondra.roeuny from Planned Parenthood, New Mexico. So Sandra, if you could unmute yourself and show your video. We're excited to hear from you. Thank you for being here.
Yes, Michael, thank you so much. And thank you to the Impacting Coffee team for having me be among this incredible group of people. So I'll begin by saying, that's in Khmer. It says, hello, my brothers and sisters. And I really mean that. When we talk about voting, we're talking about voting not just for ourselves, but for the people we care about. When I think of my own background, my parents were survivors from the Khmer Rouge regime that took the lives of over 2 million people. And because of the geopolitical warfare that happened in Southeast Asia, my parents sought refuge here in the United States. And my experience from the get-go is directly related to policies. And to me, I draw a very deep connection between voting and the type of policies that we pass that not only affect our lives here in the United States, but has ramifications for things all over the globe. So when we talk about voting, I ask you to vote with your values. Think about what values you, your family, your communities have, and show up at the polls, fill out your absentee ballot if you requested it. Do that. Go from a place where you are making sure that we elect people that's a reflection of the values and the type of communities we want to hold one another, that we see each other as brothers and sisters, I love what our previous speaker talked about. Yes, it's a presidential election year, but it's also a year for us as New Mexicans to hold to our values, elect the people that are reflective of New Mexican values. I'm also here with Planned Parenthood. So there's a lot on the ballot to repeal the old abortion ban, and we have incredible listing of folks that are running, that are seeking re-election, that are part of champions that's going to protect our reproductive health care, including abortion care. So I'll leave you with the fact, go back to your values, however that is defined, vote for people that reflect New Mexican values. And with that, thank you so much, Michael Green and Robert and the rest of the team for having me. I'll also leave in the chat my email. We have Safe at the vote polling kits. So whether you need a mask, hand sanitizers, we can get that to you. I'll also put that in the chat. And of course, we are looking for volunteers to help get out the vote. I'll put that in the chat as well. And if there's anything I can do to help you with getting out the vote, please reach out. But again, vote with your values. No matter what you do, vote with your values. Thank you.
Sage advice, Sandra. I really appreciate that. Vote with your values. And a reminder to all of our speakers today, if you could share your contact information in the chat so folks can follow up with you. Following Sandra's example, that'd be really appreciated. Our next wonderful speaker is Sydney Tellez from Common Cause, New Mexico. Sydney, could you unmute yourself and share your video?
Hi, everybody. My name is Sydney Tellez with Common Cause, New Mexico. I use she, her pronouns, and it's very important to vote because, especially this year, but always, because voting is the cornerstone of our democracy. And as so many people have said on this call before me, there have been generations of Americans who were denied their fundamental right to vote for racist and elitist motivations for centuries. And representation has been robbed from generations of communities of color. And it's so important to vote because we should be voting for all of those that never had a chance to have their voices heard in the political process. And I'm so glad some other folks have talked about, voting up and down your ballot. But another thing that we should always pay attention to are the judges that we are voting for on our ballots. If we want to have our voices heard and make change from systemic racism and issues with mass incarceration, it's very important to make sure you look and see who is representing you in the courtroom, because that's another way that we can impact change within our communities. And in New Mexico, we have a hybrid judicial system. So we have both elections for judges and retention elections for judges. So I encourage you, I believe the League of Women Voters put vote 411 in their chat. So please go look there. There's a lot of information about voters for all the races up and down the ballot, especially judges. And I'm really glad, I'll leave you with this as well. Someone brought up, how intimidating it might feel to be a first-time voter. We also run a program at Common Cause every year. It's our election protection program, where we deploy nonpartisan poll monitors to provide resources to voters and ensure that everyone is able to cast their ballot safely and securely. So if you'd like more information about voter intimidation and how to combat voter intimidation, I will put all of that information in the chat. And we are always looking for more volunteers to help us assist voters on Election Day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Sydney, for sharing all that with us. And actually mentioned she's going to put her contact information in the chat. So if you'd like to follow up with her, you will be able to do so with the chat. So next up, we have Tsiporah from New Mexico Thrives. She's been a longtime supporter of Impacting Coffee, so we're happy to have you here and hear from you this morning. So welcome.
Thank you. So a short personal story. I am a resident alien and a green card holder. So I am asking everyone who has the ability to vote to please do so, because I can't. Now, I work with nonprofits, and nonprofits do phenomenal work for our communities, all kinds of programming. But programming alone won't create the change that we all want. It takes a combination of programming and policy. And to get good policy, we need good policy makers. And to get good policy makers, you need to vote. And then we need to hold them accountable. So it's a combination of programming and policy, and underlying it all is voting. So I am asking everyone to please get out and vote. And I've got, I will put a reference into Leslie Crutchfield's 2 books. She has written How Change Happens and Forces for Good, the 6 practices of highly effective nonprofits. And the #1 practice is advocate and serve. So all nonprofits have the right to advocate and to lobby, but we cannot tell people how to vote. We can encourage them to vote. Nonprofits employ 1 in 13 people, and then there are all the volunteers, the boards, the people we serve. We have a wide reach. If we mobilize that wide reach, just think of what we could do. And thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning.
Thanks, Tsiporah. It's really great to see you. And thank you for that reminder too, that even if I know as an immigrant myself, encouraging other people to vote is also just as powerful. So thank you for that note. And nonprofits are a voting bloc. We should consider ourselves that. So our next speaker is from Center for Civic Policy. We want to welcome Isaac De Luna. Thank you so much, Isaac, for being here this morning. If you could unmute yourself and share your video and tell us about why it's so important to vote.
Thank you. It says that the host needs to turn on my video.
Oh no. Okay, we'll do that. Hold on a second.
Awesome.
Hey, there you go.
Thank you. Well, hi everyone. My name is Isaac De Luna, and I'm the Communications Director for the Center for Civic Policy. And our organization at the Center for Civic Policy, we really work to empower and amplify the voices of everyday New Mexicans, especially those who experience oppression, so that we can shape a more inclusive, responsive, and accountable democracy. And we do this using a racial, gender, class, and equity lens to make sure we build transformative power through collective responsibility so we can build thriving communities in New Mexico. As part of our work, we also convene the New Mexico Civic Engagement Table, where we incubate campaigns to foster strategic partnerships rooted in the power and experience of multiracial, LGBTQ+, and historically and systemically excluded communities, activists, and organizers, to ensure that we build power-building strategies and grassroots organizing so that we can achieve a more equitable New Mexico where everyone can live in full dignity. And when it comes to the importance of voting, right, I think that, like many of the panelists here today have expressed, people of color have been left out, right, of the decisions that are impacting our families and our communities every day. So when it comes to voting, this is one of the tools, right? Not the ultimate tool, but one of the tools that we have to ensure that we get a seat at the table. We get to, through our vote, we get to express what are the needs that our communities have, what is it that they desire for their own communities and for the future. And that is done by ensuring that we elect people, right, that understand where we're coming from, have similar experiences to those that our communities are facing, but that most importantly, that they really reflect, right, the values of family, community, right, respect, and really of caring for one another. And so this is really an opportunity to express, right, how it is that we want to shape our communities. And most importantly, right, through the vote, this is how we ensure that even we speak up, right, for those that cannot vote but are still integral parts of our communities, including many of our immigrant families, many of our refugee friends and families as well. And so this is really an exercise, right, in creating power, in showing that there is power within our community to create the changes that we want. And again, voting is only one of the tools, right? We all know that many of us here are change makers, and that we empower people to create change in many different ways. So I urge everyone to either vote by mail. You still have until the 27th to return your absentee ballot by mail. If not, you can also drop it off in person at any polling location until October 31st or on November 3rd by 7 p.m. Or you can also make use of early voting, right, which is happening now until October 31st. You can find out your nearest polling location using nmvote.org. And lastly, if you choose to vote on November 3rd, the polls open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And anytime you're doing in-person voting or dropping off your absentee ballot, just make sure, right, that you wear a mask, you practice social distancing, and if you can, carry some hand sanitizer with you to keep yourself safe and, look out for the health of others. And just lastly, again, your vote is your power. And although it may sound cliche, it really is part of your voice. And this is one of the ways, again, that we ensure that change begins to happen, right, in the way that our families and our communities need it. So thank you.
Thank you, Isak, for reminding us about voting and where to vote and all of that good stuff. So we're happy that you're here today. So I'm excited to welcome our keynote speaker. It's Alexandria Taylor. She is the Director of Sexual Assault Services at the New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs, where she oversees and supports the services provided by the 13 rape crisis centers in New Mexico. So we're very excited that Alexandria is here today. So I see that you have put on your camera and unmuted, so I'll let you take it from here. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Robert and Destiny, for organizing this great time together. And for everyone that has spoken, I'll say the keynote has been given time and time again, being here with all of these amazing folks in this room and the specific calls to action that have been given this morning. And so I will just simply do my best to add to all of the great information that has been shared already. I too want to begin by acknowledging that I am a stolen person on stolen land, which is important to me in any space that I enter. When we talk about voting, my grandparents were born and raised in the 1920s and 1930s in St. Maurice and Campty, Louisiana. And I visited the Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama last year and stood under the pillar with the names of those who had been lynched in my grandparents' parish, and realized that the history of the Jim Crow South is not too far removed from where we sit today. And so what those who have come before me have endured to vote shall not be taken lightly. And I remember my grandmother and grandfather being faithful voters, and not just in major elections, but in all elections. And I appreciated the comment about whether you needed to dress up to go to the polls, because I'm grateful we don't now, but I remember my grandparents dressing up to go to the polls because of the pride that they had in having their voice heard, because they knew that going to the polls was their right and had been hard fought and won. And so I remember going to the Civic Center in Alamogordo with my grandmother to vote for school board elections and local elections and bond elections and every special election that there was, because she showed up every single time. Fannie Lou Hamer, the amazing civil rights leader, said, "I didn't know anything about voting." And we heard this today in 2020, right? She said, "I didn't know anything about registering to vote." And you know what she did when she learned about her right to vote? She made it her life's mission to get people registered to vote and to know their rights too. The power of voting does not rest solely in our history. People-powered organizing and movement building has always been what has advanced the cause for justice in our society. Electoral organizing is an important tool in our toolbox. And once folks register to vote, show up to vote, and exercise their right to vote, our organizing power that centers the needs of our families and communities is what works to ensure those elected keep our interest in their decision-making. We're grateful for organizers like Felipe and raising the issues in this space that persist today for our communities being able to actually register and vote. I'm so inspired by all that you all shared. A few months ago, we had the blessing of sitting with Dr. Angela Davis virtually at a fundraiser hosted by one of our amazing community organizations, Crossroads for Women. And when we asked her how she continues on, she said she remains connected to young people. Our movement power is in multicultural and multi-generational movements that are activated and pushing the things most important to us forward. Bell Hooks said that love has had a place in any movement for social justice. All great movements for social justice have strongly emphasized a love ethic. The idea of love is a transformative force. And so we enter into this space with love. We organize and we roll to the polls with love. Love for our ancestors, love for our neighbors, love for our community. Voting should be an act of joy and liberation, and one that we can take pride in. For too long, it has not meant that. And when we say we voted, we should be able to then hold those in positions of power to account for their vote for our communities. I've watched folks like Adriann and the team at Forward Together organize and build power around our state and make sure that the actual folks most impacted are there at the roundhouse to speak directly to their needs. We're working on passing a Crown Act in New Mexico this upcoming session so we can wear our hair in all its glory without discrimination. Our local and statewide elections are just as important as the top of the ballot elections. And if our vote wasn't so important, those who seek to maintain systems of power and oppression wouldn't work so hard to keep us from voting. Our act of joy is an act of resistance. And I'll close out with Fannie Lou Hamer, who closed out a major party convention speech in 1964 when she said, "Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephone off the hooks because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America?" And we still ask this question today. And I know so many are sick and tired of being sick and tired and feel no matter what party is in office, it may not make a difference. Last week, I voted with my friend who has made history in her nomination to the New Mexico Court of Appeals and will continue to do so after the November 3rd election. In 2020, we are still making history. We're still knocking against these systems that didn't intend for us to be here anyway. And so if you are able, invite a friend to meet you at the polls, wear a mask, practice social distancing, and show up with pride and joy that your ancestors showed up for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandria. We really appreciate closing us out today in one of the best ways possible. That is it for our program. I just wanted to give a big, huge thank you to all of our speakers today. If you could, and give us a huge virtual round of applause for everyone that spoke today and shared their stories and shared their passions and their histories and all of their work. We really, really appreciate all of your work in our communities. I'm inspired. I think a lot of other folks are inspired, and so thank you for taking our Tuesday and making it so much more special today. I also just want to thank all of our Impact and Coffee team: Michael, Destiny, Juan, Aaron, Brianna. Thank you so much for all the things you do to make Impact and Coffee happen almost every single week, but 3 times a month. It's a lot of stuff, and we do it all volunteer, and so I really appreciate all the really, really hard work that y'all do to make this happen. And to all of our audience members today, thank you so much. Go vote. It's so important. We really appreciate y'all coming back every single week for us, for Impact and Coffee, and all the work that you do in the nonprofit sector. So we are going to be back. And guess when we're going to be back with Impact and Coffee? Election Day on November 3rd. So we have a special day planned for that. We don't have our speaker just yet, but we will make sure to announce that here in due time. But we just wanted to say thank you again to everybody. And Michael, is there anything you want to add before we go?
Yes, we have a selfie contest going on. Brianna, if you could unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about that also. We'd love to hear what we can do.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, we're excited to unveil this selfie competition, and it's just encouraging people to make sure that they spread the word that they're voting. So what we're doing is we're asking you to ask your networks to take a cool selfie, as the coolest selfie that you could possibly take, share it to our Facebook Messenger page with the hashtag hit the polls election 2020 and hashtag impacting coffee, and share it among your social media platforms. The coolest selfie that we do receive regards to voting will receive a special gift from Impacting Coffee. So we'll be posting that on our Facebook page, and then you can share it to your networks. And that is it, Robert, or Michael, sorry.
It's all good. Thanks, Bree, for sharing that. Really appreciate it. So yes, we include the hashtags in the chat. And we'll make sure to post that in Facebook too, so you have it. But when you vote next time, you can't do it while you're in the polling center. But or if you're dropping off your ballot in the mail or anything like that, feel free to post a selfie and post it to our Facebook page. That'd be really great, and we'll have an awesome prize for you. So. With that, we will close at Impacting Coffee. Thank you again so much for joining us today. We'll see you on Election Day on November 3rd back here at 9 a.m. on Zoom. Love you so much. Thank you for all the hard work, and may all your lights be green. We'll see you soon.